Okay. If one of your parents has schizophrenia, you are likely to develop schizophrenia. False. You are at risk for sure, greater than everybody else, but not likely to develop schizophrenia. It's a fairly rare thing. In a longitudinal study, D. Robbins examined the childhood characteristics of adult schizophrenics. Which of the following were they more likely to display as children? Conduct problems as opposed to schizophrenia. Schizophrenic symptoms typically appear at adolescence, the onset of adolescence, but you can see, especially retrospectively, things different in their childhood, but not necessarily the kind of delusions, hallucinations, hearing voices that you see, with the onset of adolescence and puberty. In fact, I remember there was a kid on my block growing up that later developed schizophrenia, and he actually fit this example very well, which is, as a kid, he was just kind of a bully, and he was a couple years older than my brother and I and some others, and so he was just kind of a troublemaker in the neighborhood. But then later in life developed schizophrenic symptoms. General schizophrenia, actually I live in the city in Baltimore area called Federal Hill, and there's this one guy, schizophrenic guy, who's on the street all the time. I assume he's homeless. He just kind of stands on the street corner talking out loud to himself. People I know are often concerned about, schizophrenics, are we safe kind of in the neighborhood? Schizophrenics, the paranoid schizophrenics are ones that you have to have that particular kind of concern about because they have these kind of ideas that people are out to get them and they may become violent because of that. But otherwise, schizophrenics aren't necessarily more violent than anybody else is. We know a little something, or we're starting to know a little something about schizophrenia and kind of potential genetics involved with it.
For some reason, when Ed Hollister smoked cigarettes, it helped dampen the voices that drove him to madness.
At one point, I actually put a 20 gauge to my head. And it was at that time when I realized that there was too much here that I didn't want to miss.
Hollister suffers from schizophrenia, the brain disorder which can be controlled by drugs, causes frightening hallucinations in an estimated 4 million Americans.
It was kind of like something inside was yelling about all the bad things that there were in this world.
Schizophrenics tend to be heavy smokers. Now doctors think they know why. Nicotine temporarily makes up for an apparently defective gene. It normally responds to an important brain chemical that nicotine can imitate.
They report to us that when they smoke, immediately after the smoking, the voices decrease and they feel much more oriented and are able to attend to things.
A new study done of 9 families with schizophrenic members shows that the difficulty many schizophrenics have in sorting out sounds is connected to this gene controlling nicotine. It's the first time a schizophrenia symptom has been traced to a specific gene, researchers say.
We know this defect is present in 90% of schizophrenics, and when we trace the inheritance of this defect through the family, the inheritance of schizophrenia seems to follow the same pattern.
While scientists haven't found the exact defect yet, they know it's on chromosome 15, already a site of other genes suspected in mental illness. Based on the preliminary link to this so-called receptor gene, nicotine-like drugs could be used to treat schizophrenia.
We're hoping that now that we understand that this mechanism is involved, that we can devise treatments that are better in terms of being safer and longer lasting than cigarettes.
The current drugs to combat schizophrenia are useful, but nothing at the moment comes close to a cure. Jeff Levine, CNN, reporting.
What was the example of autism in the book? Aaron, who was obsessed with Star Trek. B is actually the tapping on the shoe with her foot. Is a kid I knew and worked with. Well, I wasn't like the primary therapist, but an example of a kid with obsessive compulsive disorder. That did I mention this kid, Professor? I feel like maybe I did for some reason. But he would, obsessive compulsive disorder is the one where you think of people washing their hands a lot. They need things in very particular ways. But this guy that I was working with, this was up in Connecticut, he had a thing about walking through the, kind of phobia of walking through the doors. And so he would like walk up and before he'd go through a door, he would just need to tap his shoe to somebody else's shoe, and then he could go through the door. Somehow that he had at some point in his life associated that with kind of, that curbs his fears and nothing bad happens. And he actually, one thing that makes it hard working with obsessive compulsive disorder type kids is that he's right. He taps somebody's foot, he goes through the door, and nothing happens. So it's reinforcing to itself, because every time he does it, he reinforces in his head, oh, look, when I tap somebody's shoe, nothing happens. But, of course, he's got this, the association's wrong in the first place, but it's reinforcing every time he does it. So, anyway, just a kind of an extreme example of OCD. And, of course, again, like we were talking about with ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder is something that's continuum. I mean, we're all like obsessive compulsive or anal, you might call it. We're all different degrees of anal. I myself have certain obsessive compulsive tendencies. Not that I'm disordered or anything, but in the spectrum of all of us kind of being along here with this being disorder, I'm on this half somewhere. I don't know if you notice, like, the way I push the chairs to the side of the room. They're kind of organized as opposed to just randomly putting them in the corner. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's something a lot of us would do. Or like, keeping things certain neat. I have piles here that are pretty, I know where things are here. So, I mean, again, that's not a big deal, but we have different levels of kind of being organized. And again, so it's something that's kind of on a continuum with the most extreme people being labeled a disorder with those kind of traits. And of course, as we talked about with ADHD, the real dividing line is, does it interfere with your functioning? I mean, being obsessive compulsive is adaptive and it helps you be successful, like in terms of organizing your life or your work or your schoolwork or whatever. But when the point where like your kind of need to organize outweighs kind of your ability to be productive, whether it be at work or school or whatever, that's when it starts becoming maladaptive for you. The question is, like, ADD, is some of it potentially a good thing? And people certainly suggest it is. Other people talk about creativity, and not that being ADHD necessarily makes you creative, but kind of looseness of thoughts, in a sense. A lot of certain artists and other types that are ADHD are very creative types, and so people suggest that, there are some positive aspects to this thing. Characteristic of autistic children? Mind blindness. Somebody describe what that is. What is mind blindness? Yeah.
You're not aware that like other people have thoughts and feelings and things, or you don't understand the association between your own.
Yeah, and a big part of the characteristic of autistic children is the kind of impaired social interactions, the non-contingencies, and a part of that is mind blindness, meaning autistic children kind of not aware of other people's feelings or the reasons why, the kind of intentions behind what other people do things. There's different reasons why. I mean, there's a developmental trajectory that most kids go through where they progress through are able to be less egocentric. But there seems to be kind of biological reasons behind autism. It's not as simple as saying they haven't passed the developmental stage of getting into like concrete operations. Yeah.
Also, it kind of seems to me with the egocentric kids, a lot of the examples were like kids saying, well, I know that I would want a doll if I was upset, so I'll give this person a doll because I'm a assuming that this person feels about everything the exact same way that I do. But with autistic children, it seems to me that they sort of avoid it altogether.
Yeah, there's a detachment in a sense. How many people know autistic kids? Just some couple examples of descriptions of behaviors. Right. So, yeah, being very kind of needing things in a certain when things aren't the way they have in their head, they get very upset about that.
There wasn't anything really obviously wrong, at least as far as we were concerned. Now looking back, I've had people tell me, yeah, she was an awfully quiet baby. She never cried. We thought, we're great parents, you know, but turns out something wrong. Veronica doesn't really relate to other people. She never has been very social. I've heard and read about autistic children having very poor eye contact. Hers certainly isn't the best, but it's pretty good from what I understand. I think that Veronica has successfully attached the meaning of certain words to the objects such as water, chip, a few very basic things. She knows that ham and hot dog are different. And she'll actually ask for things. She has attached, it's funny, trying to unlock the mystery of what they're trying to say. She'll come with her shoes. She'll give you her shoes and she'll want her shoes on. She doesn't want her shoes on, she just wants to go outside. And she knows that you put your shoes on before you go out. Veronica has expressed herself with injurious behavior, and I was dismayed to see that surface because I had read about it and I was glad she wasn't doing it. Matter of fact, she was having a tantrum in the Target store, and she banged her head on the floor and gave me a look as if to say, that hurt. And she stopped. She wouldn't do it. When she is angry, she'll take her puzzle and bang her head. If the puzzle isn't working right, she'll bang, or if I'm telling her to come and she doesn't want to come, bang, bang, bang.
Clearly, being a parent of an autistic child is challenging. There's different degrees of autism. There's some very mild forms of autism. You saw the tantrum she threw. But there are even more severe. You heard her talking about head banging. That's a common problem that's very severe. You got to kind of teach kids to kind of work on that. This mom seems to have taken things well, as most moms do, but it can be very challenging.
My mom works with autistic children and special education children and at a special school. And she has a lot of autistic children, and some of them, as they get older, they become more violent. Like, she told me one time this kid, he threw desks across the classroom and everything. Mm-hmm. And at times they're very hard to handle because they punch, they bite, and it's very difficult. You have to have patience with them.
Yeah, one girl when I was working at up in Connecticut at an inpatient unit, meeting a psychiatric, where kids stayed there. But she was a little girl, I forget how old, but probably like 7 or so. But, this impaired social interactions and maybe a nervousness about meeting new people. Like when she would meet you, she would kick you or bite you. So, that was kind of her way to say hello. And so it just takes a certain person to be able to kind of, not get frazzled and kind of, do that and kind of stay with that kid. You see, by the way, well, in the video talked about this, there is a high correlation, not correlation, correspondence, comorbidity. What comorbidity means is like if you have one emotional disorder, you also have another. Between ADHD and conduct disorder. And not surprisingly, kids who kind of are impulsive in their behaviors will tend to get in negative kind of interactions with other kids. And that's probably the main